The bitter wind howled through the cracks of the Golden Horizon saloon as Sophia Zimmer pressed her trembling body against the locked door of her home, her fingers raw and bleeding from pounding against the unyielding wood. The blizzard had descended upon the Colorado mining town with a vengeance, transforming the dusty streets into a treacherous white wasteland. But the cold seeping into Sophia's bones wasn't nearly as painful as the betrayal she felt knowing her husband was the one who had thrown her out into this deadly storm. "Harold, please," Sophia cried, her voice barely audible over the shrieking wind. Her thin calico dress offered little protection against the brutal elements, and her lips had already turned an alarming shade of blue. The snow had begun to accumulate on her shoulders and in her golden brown hair as the freezing temperatures threatened to claim her life. "Harold, I know you're in there. Open the door." Only silence answered her desperate pleas. Through the frosted window, she could see the warm glow of the fire her husband had built, the fire she had collected wood for earlier that day, and the silhouette of a bottle as it was raised to his lips. Harold had been drinking steadily since the mine had laid him off 3 weeks prior, his temper growing shorter with each passing day. Tonight, after she dared to suggest he look for work at the new railroad camp, he'd exploded in a rage she'd never witnessed before. Sophia slumped against the door, her strength fading. The town was nearly deserted, with most folks huddled safely inside their homes, waiting out the unexpected April blizzard of 1878. The nearest neighbor lived a quarter-mile down the road, an impossible journey in these conditions. As consciousness began to slip away, she became vaguely aware of the sound of horse hooves crunching through the snow. "Madam, good Lord, what are you doing out here?" The deep voice barely penetrated the fog enveloping her mind. Through half-frozen eyelashes, Sophia caught sight of a tall figure dismounting from a sturdy palomino. "Madam, can you hear me?" Strong hands gently lifted her from the snow-covered porch. Without hesitation, the stranger unwrapped his thick woolen coat and draped it around her shoulders before pulling her close against his warm chest. "I'm Grant Dawson, madam. I need to get you somewhere warm right quick, or you won't last the hour." Sophia tried to speak, but her lips were too stiff from cold. As the man lifted her onto his horse, she caught one last glimpse of her home, the place she'd poured 5 years of her life into, before slipping into darkness. The crackle of a fire and the scent of coffee slowly drew Sophia back to consciousness. She was lying on a cot covered with several thick buffalo hides, the weight of them providing a comforting pressure. As her eyes adjusted to the dimness, she realized she was in a small cabin, simply but neatly furnished. "You're awake." The man from earlier, Grant, moved into her line of vision. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30, with weathered skin that spoke of years spent outdoors. His dark hair was flecked with premature gray at the temples, and his eyes were the color of spring leaves. "I was starting to worry. How long have I been here?" Sophia's voice came out as a croak, her throat raw. "Since last night. It's nearly noon now." He poured coffee into a tin cup and approached the cot. "Can you sit up? This will help warm you from the inside." With his assistance, Sophia managed to prop herself against the wall, wincing as feeling returned to her extremities. As she reached for the coffee, she realized she was wearing a man's flannel shirt several sizes too large for her slender frame. "I hope you don't mind," Grant said, noticing her confusion. "Your dress was soaked through." I didn't look, I promise." "I just couldn't let you stay in those wet clothes." A flush spread across Sophia's cheeks, but she nodded her understanding. The alternative would have been pneumonia or worse. "Thank you, Mr. Dawson. I owe you my life." "Grant, please." He sat on a wooden stool near the cot, his expression grave. "Now, would you mind telling me why I found a woman locked out of her home during the worst blizzard we've seen in these parts for years?" Sophia's hands tightened around the warm cup. "My husband." The words caught in her throat. How could she explain to this stranger that the man who had vowed to love and protect her had instead thrown her bodily from their home in a drunken rage? "We had a disagreement." Grant's jaw tightened. "A disagreement that warranted leaving you to freeze to death." He stood abruptly and paced the small room. I've known men to be cruel, madam, but that goes beyond cruelty. Harold hasn't always been this way, Sophia said softly, though even as she spoke the words, she questioned their truth. There had always been a harshness to Harold Zimmer, a quick temper that had occasionally manifested as a bruising grip on her arm or cutting words that left invisible wounds. But she told herself that was simply a man's way, especially one who worked the dangerous mining jobs that Harold did. He's been different since losing his position at the mine. That's no excuse, Grant said firmly. No man worth his salt treats a woman that way, no matter what troubles he's facing. He returned to the stool, his expression softening. What's your name, madam? Sophia Zimmer. Well, Mrs. Zimmer, the storm's still raging outside, and it likely will for another day at least. You're welcome to my hospitality until it passes. He gestured to the cabin around them. It's not much, but it's dry and warm. And where will you sleep? Sophia asked, suddenly aware that there appeared to be only the one cot. I've got my bedroll, Grant replied with a smile that transformed his serious face. I've slept in far worse conditions on cattle drives. You're a cowboy, then? Was. Now I work for the Rocky Mountain Express, scouting routes for the new rail line they're putting through these mountains. Pride laced his voice. It's good, steady work, better than chasing ornery steers across the plains. As they talked, Sophia felt herself relaxing despite her predicament. There was something reassuringly solid about Grant Dawson, a quiet confidence that put her at ease. When he prepared a simple meal of beans and salt pork, she found her appetite returning, and by evening she was able to move about the cabin without assistance, though her feet and hands remained tender from the frostbite she'd narrowly escaped. That night, as promised, Grant slept on the floor near the hearth while Sophia took the cot. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her as she stared at the rough-hewn ceiling, her mind replaying the events that had led her here. Harold's face, contorted with rage, flashed before her eyes. The sound of his voice, thick with whiskey and hatred, echoed in her ears. You think you're better than me, don't you? He had snarled, advancing on her as she backed toward the door. Think I can't provide for my own wife? Maybe you've got your eye on one of those railroad men, is that it? Been warming someone else's bed while I'm down in that God-forsaken hole. The accusation had struck Sophia like a physical blow. In 5 years of marriage, she had never been anything but faithful, even as Harold's drinking had worsened and his treatment of her had deteriorated. She had worked taking in laundry and mending to supplement their income when the mine reduced hours, had maintained their home with care despite limited resources, had even defended Harold to the townspeople who increasingly regarded him with suspicion. Harold, no, she had protested. I would never, but he hadn't let her finish. With surprising strength for a man who had been drinking since midday, he had grabbed her by the shoulders and shoved her through the door, onto the porch where the first snowflakes of the blizzard were beginning to fall. Go find him then. Harold had shouted. Go find whatever man you've been spreading your legs for. The door had slammed, the lock had clicked, and Sophia had found herself alone in the growing storm. A tear slipped down her cheek at the memory. What would happen when the blizzard passed? Could she return to Harold, knowing what he was capable of? Did she even want to across the cabin? Grant shifted in his sleep, the movement drawing Sophia from her troubled thoughts. In the faint glow of the banked fire, she studied his profile, the straight nose, the firm jawline softened by dark stubble. He had shown her more kindness in one day than Harold had in months. What did that say about the vows she had taken? With these unsettling questions swirling in her mind, Sophia finally drifted into an uneasy sleep. The next morning brought no respite from the storm. If anything, the wind had intensified, howling around the cabin like a pack of hungry wolves. Grant awoke before Sophia and had coffee brewing by the time she opened her eyes. I need to check on my horse, he said, after they'd shared a breakfast of cornmeal mush sweetened with molasses. She's in the lean-to out back, but I want to make sure she's staying warm enough. I'll come with you, Sophia offered, eager for even a brief change of scenery. Grant looked uncertain. It's mighty cold out there and you're still recovering. I'm feeling much better, she insisted, already reaching for the thick coat he'd wrapped around her when he found her. Besides, I've always had a fondness for horses. Together they ventured into the small covered area attached to the back of the cabin. The Palomino nickered softly when she saw Grant, pushing her velvety nose against his chest in greeting. "This is Sunny," Grant said, stroking the horse's golden neck. "She's been with me since she was a filly." Sophia approached slowly, holding out her hand for the mare to sniff. "She's beautiful. She likes you," Grant observed as Sunny nuzzled Sophia's palm. "She's usually more cautious around strangers. Animals can sense good intentions," Sophia replied, remembering the stray cat she'd befriended back home, much to Harold's annoyance. He'd threatened to drown the creature if she kept feeding it, so she'd had to sneak scraps when he wasn't looking. After ensuring Sunny had fresh hay and water, they returned to the cabin. The day stretched before them, empty of obligations but filled with the awkwardness of two strangers confined together by circumstance. "Tell me about yourself, Mrs. Zimmer," Grant said as they sat by the fire, mugs of coffee warming their hands. "How did you come to settle in Golden Horizon?" "Please call me Sophia," she responded, finding formality unnecessary given their situation. "I came west with my parents in '71. My father heard there was good land to be had in Colorado territory, but the journey was harder than he expected." She paused, the familiar grief washing over her even after all this time. "They both took sick with fever outside of Denver. They're buried there." "I'm sorry," Grant said softly. Sophia nodded her acknowledgement. "I was 18, alone in a strange place. I had some money from the sale of our wagon and supplies, but not enough to return east to my mother's family in Pennsylvania. I found work as a seamstress in a dress shop in Denver, and that's where I met Harold. He was passing through on his way to the mines, and She hesitated, trying to remember what had attracted her to Harold Zimmer in those early days. He seemed so confident, so sure of himself. He promised me a good life, a home of my own. After the uncertainty following my parents' deaths, that security was appealing. And was it a good life? Grant's green eyes held no judgment, only curiosity. Sophia stared into her coffee. It was at first. Harold was making good money at the mine, enough to build the small house where we live now. I planted a garden, kept chickens. I thought perhaps we might start a family. She swallowed hard. But then the accidents began at the mine. 3 men died when a shaft collapsed last year. Harold wasn't hurt, but he saw it happen. That's when the drinking started in earnest. The mines can change a man, Grant acknowledged. I've seen it happen too many times. Some turn to drink, others to violence, some to both. His perceptiveness made Sophia uncomfortable, as if he could see the bruises that had long since faded from her skin but remained vivid in her memory. "And you?" she asked, deflecting attention from herself. "What brought you to these mountains?" A shadow crossed Grant's face. "I was born in Missouri, raised on a small farm. When the war came, my father and older brother joined the Union Army. Neither returned." His voice was matter-of-fact, but Sophia could sense the old pain beneath the words. "My mother struggled to keep the farm going, but by '68 we couldn't make ends meet. I headed west, found work as a ranch hand in Kansas, then a cattle driver. Spent nearly 8 years on the trail before deciding I wanted something more settled. And the railroad provides that." "To a point," Grant conceded. "I still spend plenty of time in the saddle, scouting routes through these mountains, but I have this place to return to. It's mine, small as it is." His gaze swept the cabin with clear pride. "I built it with my own hands, added to it bit by bit. One day I hope to have a proper ranch, horses, and cattle of my own." "It sounds like a good dream," Sophia said sincerely. Then, more hesitantly, Is there someone who shares that dream with you?" Grant's eyes met hers and something unspoken passed between them. "No," he said softly. "Not yet." The intimacy of the moment was broken by a particularly violent gust of wind that rattled the cabin's shutters. Grant rose to check that they were secured, and the conversation shifted to more mundane topics. As the day wore on, Sophia found herself increasingly drawn to this quiet, thoughtful man. He spoke little of himself unless prompted, but when he did, his words revealed a depth of character that intrigued her. He read voraciously, evidenced by the stack of dog-eared books beside the cot, and shared with her his favorite passages from Thoreau and Emerson. He told her stories of his years on cattle, drives, the camaraderie around campfires, the terror of stampedes, the beauty of starlit nights on the open plains. In turn, Sophia shared her own stories, her childhood in Pennsylvania, her mother's teachings about herbal remedies, her dreams of one day opening a small dress shop of her own. Grant listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed he valued her thoughts and experiences. By evening, as they shared a meal of rabbit stew Grant had snared the animal the previous day, Sophia realized with a start that she felt more at ease with this man she'd known for barely 48 hours than she had with her husband in years. The realization was both liberating and terrifying. As if sensing her inner turmoil, Grant spoke gently. "The storm seems to be easing. By morning the trails should be passable." Sophia nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "I should return home," she said, though the word home stuck in her throat like a fishbone. "Is that what you want?" Grant asked, his tone careful, neutral. "It's where I belong," Sophia replied, the answer as automatic as it was unconvincing. Grant was silent for a long moment. "No one belongs where they're not safe, Sophia." His use of her given name, spoken with such quiet conviction, brought tears to her eyes. "He's my husband," she whispered. "That doesn't give him the right to harm you." Grant leaned forward, his expression earnest. "I don't mean to overstep, but I've seen the fear in your eyes when you speak of him, the way you flinch at sudden movements. Those aren't the reactions of a woman who feels secure in her home." Sophia couldn't deny the truth of his words, but years of conditioning had taught her to defend Harold, to make excuses for his behavior. "He's been under such strain. With the mine closing, many men face hardships without turning on those they've vowed to protect," Grant interrupted gently. "I won't tell you what to do, Sophia. That choice must be yours, but know that you have options. You don't have to return to him." The possibility hung in the air between them, tantalizing in its simplicity yet daunting in its implications. To leave Harold would mean defying not only her marriage vows but societal expectations. A woman alone in the West faced countless challenges, from financial insecurity to damaged reputation. "Where would I go?" Sophia asked, the question directed as much to herself as to Grant. "Denver, perhaps." "You said you worked as a seamstress there before, or—" Grant hesitated, as if weighing his next words carefully. "You could stay here at least until you decide what you want to do. I'll be heading out to scout for the railroad again soon. You'd have the cabin to yourself." The offer was generous, unexpected, and filled Sophia with both gratitude and apprehension. "I couldn't impose, it's not an imposition," Grant assured her. "It would ease my mind knowing you're safe." Their eyes met across the table, and Sophia felt something shift between them, a recognition of feelings that had no right to exist but had taken root nonetheless. Quickly, she looked away. "Thank you for the offer," she said formally. "I'll consider it." Grant nodded, respecting her need for space to think. "That's all I ask." That night, sleep proved even more elusive than before. Sophia lay awake, listening to the storm gradually subsiding and the occasional creak of the floorboards as Grant shifted in his bedroll. By dawn, she had reached no firm decision, though her heart rebelled at the thought of returning to Harold. True to Grant's prediction, morning brought clear skies and a world transformed by the blizzard. Every tree branch was encased in crystal, every surface blanketed in pristine white. After a simple breakfast, Grant saddled Sonny. "I can take you back to town if that's your wish," he said, his expression carefully neutral. Sophia stood in the doorway of the cabin, Grant's coat pulled tight around her against the cold. The path back to Harold, back to fear and uncertainty, lay clear before her, yet something held her rooted to the spot. "I don't know what I want," she admitted, the first honest words she'd spoken about her situation. Grant approached her slowly, as if afraid she might flee. "Then don't decide today. Stay here just until you're certain." His proximity made her heart race, though whether from anxiety or something else entirely she couldn't say. "People will talk," she murmured. "People always talk," Grant replied with a hint of a smile. Would you rather face gossip or danger? Put that way, the choice seemed obvious. I'll stay, Sophia said, the decision bringing with it an unexpected sense of relief, just for a few days until I can make proper arrangements. The smile that spread across Grant's face warmed her more effectively than any fire. I'm glad, he said simply. Over the next several days, as the snow began to melt and the trails cleared, Sophia and Grant fell into a comfortable routine. He taught her to chop wood without blistering her hands, showed her how to set snares for rabbits, and educated her on the signs of changing weather in these mountains. In return, she organized his small collection of supplies, mended his shirts with neat, even stitches, and prepared meals that were a welcome change from his usual fare. They talked for hours, sharing stories and opinions on everything from politics to poetry. Sophia found herself laughing more than she had in years, her natural vivacity long suppressed under Harold's critical eye re-emerging like spring flowers after a harsh winter. Grant never pressed her about her plans, never made her feel that his hospitality had conditions attached. Yet as the days passed, Sophia became increasingly aware of the growing attraction between them. It manifested in lingering glances, in the way their hands would brush when passing items at meals, in the charged silence that sometimes fell during their conversations. On the 5th day after the blizzard, Grant announced that he needed to ride into town for supplies. Would you like to come? He asked as he prepared Sonny for the journey. It might be good for you to get out, see other people. The thought of potentially encountering Harold sent a chill through Sophia that had nothing to do with the crisp morning air. No, she said quickly. I'd rather stay here if you don't mind. Grant studied her face for a moment before nodding. I understand. Is there anything you need from town? Sophia hesitated, then decided to voice the request that had been forming in her mind. If you happen to pass by my house, there's a small wooden box on the shelf above the stove. It contains some keepsakes of my parents, my mother's wedding ring, my father's pocket watch. And there's a blue dress in the trunk at the foot of the bed, if Harold isn't home. She trailed off, realizing she was essentially asking Grant to steal her possessions from her husband's house. I'll try, Grant promised, understanding her hesitation. But if he's there, I won't risk a confrontation. Not yet, anyway. The qualifier hung in the air as Grant mounted Sonny. Sophia waved as he rode away, then returned to the cabin, finding it oddly empty without his presence. Hours passed as Sophia busied herself with small tasks, sweeping the floor, washing the few dishes they had used at breakfast, organizing Grant's collection of books by author. As the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, anxiety gnawed at her. Surely Grant should have returned by now. Golden Horizon was only an hour's ride away, even accounting for the muddy trails left by the melting snow. Just as she was considering the possibility that something had happened to him, the sound of hoofbeats reached her ears. Rushing to the door, Sophia felt relief wash over her at the sight of Grant approaching. However, her relief quickly turned to concern when she noticed the stiffness in his posture and the grim set of his mouth. "What is it?" she asked as he dismounted. "Did something happen in town?" Grant handed her a small bundle wrapped in one of her own shawls. "I got your things," he said, his voice tight. "Harold wasn't home." Sophia unwrapped the bundle with trembling fingers to find the wooden box and blue dress she had requested. Along with a few other personal items, Grant had thoughtfully included her mother's Bible, a small hand mirror, a pair of earrings she had purchased with her first earnings as a seamstress. "Thank you," she whispered, clutching the items to her chest. "There's more," Grant said, his expression darkening. "I spoke with Sheriff Miller while I was in town. Apparently, Harold's been telling anyone who'll listen that you ran off with another man during the blizzard. He's painted himself as the abandoned husband, wronged by an unfaithful wife." The accusation, though coming from Harold rather than Grant, hit Sophia like a physical blow. "That's a lie," she gasped. "He locked me out. He would have let me freeze to death." "I know," Grant said soothingly, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. The sheriff didn't seem entirely convinced by Harold's story, especially given his reputation for drinking, but But most people will believe the husband over the wife, Sophia finished bitterly. She had seen it happen before women blamed for their own mistreatment, their reputations sullied by the very men who had wronged them. "There's something else," Grant said, his tone growing even more serious. "Harold was at the saloon when I arrived in town. He was drunk, making threats about finding you and teaching you a lesson for humiliating him." Sophia, Grant's green eyes locked with hers. "I don't think it's safe for you to stay in these parts, not with Harold in that state." Sophia sank onto a chair, her mind reeling. She had known returning to Harold was impossible, but she had hoped to at least remain in the area, perhaps find work in one of the neighboring towns where she might rebuild her life with some semblance of dignity. "Where can I go?" she asked, the question that had plagued her for days now taking on new urgency. Grant knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "The railroad company is sending me to survey a new route starting tomorrow. It would take me toward Denver. You could come with me, at least as far as the city. You said yourself you had worked there before. You could start again." The offer was tempting, but Sophia couldn't ignore the impropriety of traveling alone with a man who was not her husband. "People would talk," she said weakly. "People are already talking," Grant countered. "At least this way you'd be safely away from Harold's reach." As Sophia weighed her limited options, Grant continued, "I know we've known each other only a short time, Sophia, but I care about what happens to you. I can't in good conscience leave you here knowing Harold is looking for you and in a dangerous mood." The sincerity in his eyes moved her deeply. This man, who owed her nothing, had repeatedly put her welfare above his own convenience. In contrast, Harold, who had vowed before God to cherish and protect her, had cast her out to die and now sought to destroy what remained of her reputation. "When would we leave?" she asked, her decision made. Relief washed over Grant's face. "First light tomorrow. We'll need to travel light and fast." That evening, as they prepared for their journey, Sophia found herself both anxious and exhilarated by the prospect of a completely fresh start. She packed her few possessions in a small bundle, while Grant gathered provisions and checked his maps. "The route will take us through some rough country," he explained, tracing a line on the worn map spread across the table. "But Sonny's sure-footed, and I know these mountains well. We should reach Denver in about 5 days, weather permitting." Sophia nodded, trying to absorb the reality that tomorrow she would leave behind everything familiar: her home, the town where she had lived for 5 years, her identity as Mrs. Harold Zimmer. The thought was simultaneously terrifying and liberating. As they shared a final meal in the cabin that had become her sanctuary, Sophia found herself watching Grant's hands as he sliced bread, strong, capable hands that had pulled her from the snow, that had built this cabin log by log, that had never raised themselves in anger against her. "Thank you," she said suddenly, the words inadequate for the depth of her gratitude. Grant looked up, his expression questioning. "For saving my life," Sophia clarified, "for giving me shelter, for helping me see that I deserve better than what I had with Harold." A slow smile spread across Grant's face, transforming his features and making Sophia's heart skip a beat. "You do deserve better," he said softly. "Much better." The air between them seemed to crackle with unspoken feelings. For a moment, Sophia thought Grant might reach for her hand, might say the words that hovered just beyond articulation. Instead, he cleared his throat and returned his attention to their meal preparations. "We should get some rest," he said practically. "Tomorrow will be a long day." Sophia nodded, recognizing that whatever was growing between them would need time to develop naturally, without the pressure of her vulnerable situation influencing their feelings. Grant was too honorable to take advantage of her dependency on him, and she respected him all the more for his restraint. That night, as she lay on the cot for what would be the last time, Sophia allowed herself to envision a future in which she was truly free from fear, free from Harold's volatile moods, free to pursue her own dreams. Whether Grant Dawson would be part of that future remained to be seen, but for the first time in years, Sophia felt hopeful about what lay ahead. Dawn came early, painting the snow-covered landscape with hues of pink and gold. Grant had already saddled Sunny and secured their supplies by the time Sophia emerged from the cabin, dressed in her blue dress with Grant's coat over it for warmth. "Ready?" he asked, offering his hand to help her mount. Sophia nodded, taking one last look at the cabin that had been her refuge. "Ready?" Grant swung up behind her, his arms encircling her waist as he took the reins. The closeness was both comforting and disconcerting, but there was no alternative. They would need to ride double until they could acquire a second horse in one of the larger settlements along their route. As Sunny carried them away from the cabin, following a narrow trail that wound through stands of pine and aspen, Sophia felt as if she were leaving not just a physical place but a chapter of her life. Ahead lay uncertainty, but also possibility, the chance to rewrite her story on her own terms. The first day's journey passed uneventfully as they followed game trails and old Indian paths through the mountains. Grant proved to be a knowledgeable guide, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of the land's history. By nightfall, they had made good progress, stopping to make camp in a sheltered grove beside a small stream. As Grant built a fire and prepared a simple meal, Sophia spread the bedroll he had provided for her. The night promised to be cold, but not dangerously so, and the stars overhead were breathtaking in their brilliance. "It's beautiful," she murmured, gazing upward. Grant followed her gaze. "It is. One of the things I love about these mountains, you feel closer to heaven up here." They ate their supper in companionable silence, listening to the night sounds around them, the soft bubbling of the stream, the occasional hoot of an owl, the whisper of wind through the pines. "Tell me about Denver," Sophia said as they sipped coffee beside the fire. "Has it changed much since I lived there?" "It's growing fast," Grant replied. "The railroads brought more people, more businesses. They're calling it the Queen City of the Plains now." He hesitated, then added, "You'll have opportunities there that you wouldn't in a mining town like Golden Horizon." "I hope so," Sophia said softly. "I've been thinking about what I might do. I still have my skills as a seamstress. Perhaps I could find work in a dress shop again, save enough to eventually open my own small establishment." "I've no doubt you'll succeed in whatever you choose," Grant said with genuine conviction. "You're resourceful and determined. I saw that in how you survived being locked out in that blizzard." Many would have given up. His faith in her abilities warmed Sophia more effectively than the fire. For so long, Harold had belittled her efforts, criticizing everything from her cooking to her appearance. To have someone see strength in her was a novel and empowering experience. As they prepared to sleep, Grant insisted on taking the first watch. "We're probably safe out here," he explained, "but it's better to be cautious, especially until we're farther from Golden Horizon." Sophia didn't argue, though she felt a pang of guilt at the thought of him sacrificing his rest for her safety. She crawled into her bedroll, exhaustion from the day's journey quickly overtaking her despite the unfamiliar surroundings. Some hours later, she awoke to the touch of Grant's hand on her shoulder. "Sophia," he whispered urgently, "we need to move." Instantly alert, Sophia sat up. "What is it?" "Riders coming up the trail. Could be nothing, but I don't want to take chances." Grant was already gathering their belongings, his movements swift and efficient in the moonlight. Without questioning further, Sophia helped break camp, her heart pounding with apprehension. Within minutes, they were mounted on Sunny, moving quietly through the trees away from the trail. "Do you think it's Harold?" Sophia whispered against Grant's back as they rode. "Can't be sure," Grant replied tersely. "But someone's tracking us. I noticed signs earlier but didn't want to worry you unnecessarily." They traveled for another hour, taking a circuitous route through dense forest before Grant deemed it safe to stop again. By then, the eastern sky was beginning to lighten with the first hints of dawn. "We'll rest here briefly," Grant said, helping Sophia dismount. "Then we'll need to change our route. I had planned to follow the main trail to Burlington, but we'll need to take the old prospector's path instead. It's rougher going, but less traveled." Sophia nodded, too tired and anxious to argue. As Grant spread their bedrolls again, she sank down gratefully, her muscles aching from the unaccustomed hours in the saddle. "Try to sleep," Grant encouraged. "I'll keep watch." Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded Sophia. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves sent her heart racing with the fear that Harold had somehow found them. When Grant finally suggested they resume their journey as the sun cleared the eastern mountains, she was almost relieved. The day that followed was grueling, the trail Grant had chosen barely deserving of the name. They climbed steep, rocky slopes where Sunny had to pick her way carefully, descended into ravines where icy streams soaked them to the knees, and pushed through thickets so dense that branches tore at their clothing and skin. By mid-afternoon, even Grant was showing signs of fatigue, his normally upright posture sagging slightly as he led Sunny through a particularly challenging section of trail. "We need to rest," Sophia said, concerned by his pallor. "You've barely slept." Grant shook his head stubbornly. "We need to put more distance behind us. There's a mining camp about 3 hours ahead. We can rest there tonight, maybe acquire another horse." But as they pushed onward, the weather began to deteriorate. Dark clouds gathered overhead and a cold wind whipped through the trees, carrying the unmistakable scent of approaching snow. "Another storm?" Sophia asked anxiously, remembering all too well her near-death experience in the last blizzard. Grant's expression was grim. "Looks that way." Mountain weather can change without warning this time of year. He scanned the surrounding terrain with practiced eyes. "There's a line shack used by shepherders about a mile from here. If we can reach it before the storm hits, we'll have shelter." They urged Sunny to a faster pace, the mare sensing their urgency and responding valiantly despite her own fatigue. As the first snowflakes began to fall, a small, weathered structure came into view in a clearing ahead. "Thank God," Sophia breathed as Grant helped her dismount. Her relief was short-lived, however, as Grant tensed beside her. "Someone's been here recently," he said in a low voice, pointing to fresh tracks in the muddy ground around the shack. Drawing his revolver, Grant approached the door cautiously. "Stay with Sunny," he instructed Sophia, who remained rooted to the spot, her heart pounding. Grant pushed the door open slowly, weapon raised. After a tense moment, his shoulders relaxed. "It's empty," he called back to Sophia, "but someone was definitely here within the last day or so." As Grant led Sunny to the crude lean-to attached to the shack, Sophia ventured inside. The single room was sparse but dry, with a small stone fireplace, a rough wooden table with 2 stools, and a platform bed covered with straw. A previous occupant had left a small stack of firewood beside the hearth, for which Sophia was profoundly grateful. By the time Grant joined her, having seen to Sunny's needs, the snow was falling heavily. He secured the door against the building storm, then set about lighting a fire while Sophia unpacked their provisions. "Do you think the tracks were Harold's?" she asked, the question that had been burning in her mind since Grant's discovery. Grant considered before answering. "Hard to say. They could belong to anyone, a trapper, a prospector, even another railroad surveyor, but we should be cautious regardless." As night fell and the storm intensified, the small shack became a haven of warmth and relative comfort. They shared a meal of jerky and hardtack, supplemented by coffee that Grant brewed over the fire. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the shutters and driving snow against the walls, but inside, wrapped in her bedroll near the fire, Sophia felt an unexpected sense of peace. "Tell me about your dreams," she said to Grant, who sat cross-legged beside her, whittling a piece of wood with his pocket knife. He looked up, surprised by the question. "My dreams? You mentioned wanting a ranch someday," Sophia elaborated. "Tell me more about it. What do you envision?" A slow smile spread across Grant's face as he set aside his whittling. "I have land picked out already," he admitted. "About 20 miles east of Denver, where the plains meet the foothills. Good water, good grass. I've been saving every penny from my railroad work to put toward it." "How much more do you need?" Sophia asked, caught up in his enthusiasm. "Another year's wages should do it if I'm careful," Grant replied. "Then I'll start small, a cabin first, not unlike the one you stayed in, then gradually add to it. A few cattle, some horses. Nothing fancy, but something of my own." The longing in his voice resonated with Sophia, who had harbored similar desires for independence throughout her marriage to Harold. "It sounds wonderful," she said sincerely. "And what of your dreams?" Grant asked, turning the conversation back to her. Beyond the dress shop, what do you hope for? Sophia considered the question carefully. For so long, her dreams had been suppressed, deemed impractical or even selfish by Harold. To articulate them now felt almost forbidden. I want peace, she said finally. Safety. The freedom to make my own choices without fear of consequences. She paused, then added more softly, and someday, perhaps, a family, children of my own to love. Grant's gaze held hers, warm and understanding. Those are worthy dreams, Sophia, and achievable ones. Are they? She asked, doubt creeping into her voice. I'm still legally bound to Harold. Even if I never return to him, I'll always be his wife in the eyes of the law and the church. There are ways, Grant said carefully. Divorces can be obtained, especially in cases where there's been cruelty. The word hung between them, cruelty so clinical, so inadequate to describe the slow erosion of Sophia's spirit under Harold's dominance. Yet the possibility of legal freedom, however difficult to obtain, sparked a glimmer of hope in her heart. I hadn't considered that, she admitted. I was raised to believe marriage is forever, for better or worse. For better or worse doesn't mean enduring abuse, Grant said firmly. No God I believe in would expect that of anyone. His certainty was comforting, challenging as it did the guilt Sophia had carried about potentially breaking her vows. Before she could respond, however, a sound outside the shack froze them both in place, the distinct whinny of a horse, followed by the crunch of boots in snow. Grant was on his feet instantly, revolver in hand. Get behind me, he whispered to Sophia, who complied without hesitation. The door burst open, letting in a swirl of snow and wind, and Harold Zimmer, his face contorted with rage and his own gun pointed directly at Grant. Found you, Harold snarled, his words slurring slightly. The smell of whiskey emanated from him, sharp and sour in the close confines of the shack. Knew you'd run off with some man, should have known it'd be one of them railroad scouts. Sophia stepped out from behind Grant, her fear momentarily overshadowed by anger. You locked me out in a blizzard, Harold. You would have let me die. Harold's bloodshot eyes narrowed. You deserved it, carrying on with him behind my back. Everyone in town knows what kind of woman you are now. That's a lie, Sophia retorted, her voice steadier than she felt. Grant saved my life after you endangered it. Nothing happened between us. Harold's bitter laugh cut through her protestations. Nothing. You're traveling alone with him, sleeping under the same roof. You expect me to believe nothing happened? Lower your weapon, Zimmer, Grant said evenly, his own gun unwavering. Whatever grievances you have with your wife, this isn't the way to resolve them. She's my wife, Harold spat. I'll deal with her as I see fit. As Harold took a menacing step forward, Sophia noticed something that sent ice through her veins, a second figure appearing in the doorway behind him, equally disheveled and armed. That her, Zimmer? The newcomer asked, his gaze raking over Sophia in a way that made her skin crawl. Pretty little thing, ain't she? Grant's expression hardened as he assessed this new threat. 2 against 1, both armed and clearly intoxicated, made for a dangerous situation. This doesn't concern you, Miller, Grant addressed the second man. This is between Zimmer and his wife. Made it my concern when he offered me $50 to help track you down, Miller replied with a yellowed grin. Besides, he promised me a little time with his faithless wife once he's done teaching her a lesson. Seems fair, don't it? The crude implication sent a wave of nausea through Sophia. Harold had not only pursued her with violence in mind, but had apparently promised her to this stranger as if she were property to be bartered. Grant's voice was deadly quiet when he spoke again. Both of you leave now. I won't tell you again. Harold's response was to cock his revolver. You're in no position to be giving orders, Dawson. Now step aside so I can take what's mine. What happened next unfolded with terrifying speed. As Harold raised his weapon, Grant fired, the report deafening in the small space. Harold staggered backward, clutching his shoulder, while Miller fumbled with his own gun. Before he could aim, Grant had turned and fired again, catching Miller in the arm and causing him to drop his weapon with a howl of pain. Sophia, get their guns, Grant ordered, keeping his revolver trained on the 2 wounded men. Moving with a calmness that belied her inner turmoil, Sophia collected the fallen weapons, placing them on the table well out of reach. "You shot me," Harold said incredulously, blood seeping between the fingers pressed to his shoulder. "You actually shot me. Be grateful I aimed for your shoulder and not your heart," Grant replied coldly. "Now, both of you are going to sit down while I decide what to do with you." Miller, cradling his injured arm, sank onto one of the stools without argument. Harold remained standing, swaying slightly as shock and alcohol worked through his system. "She's still my wife," he insisted, though with less conviction than before. "The law's on my side." "The law also frowns on attempted murder and conspiracy to commit assault," Grant countered. "Which is what Sheriff Miller back in Golden Horizon will hear about unless you're willing to come to an arrangement." Harold's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "What kind of arrangement?" "You grant Sophia a divorce on grounds of cruelty, make no further attempts to find her or harm her, and in return, we don't press charges for tonight's events." Sophia held her breath as Harold considered the offer, his face cycling through expressions of rage, calculation, and finally, defeat. "Fine," he muttered. "She ain't worth the trouble anyway." The casual dismissal of their 5-year marriage should have hurt, Sophia thought, but instead she felt only relief. Grant, however, wasn't satisfied. "I'll need more than your word," he said, reaching into his saddlebag and producing a small notebook and pencil. "You're going to write out a statement admitting to locking Sophia out during the blizzard and expressing your willingness to divorce on grounds of cruelty. Both of you will sign it as a confession, with the understanding that it will be presented to the authorities if you ever come near Sophia again." Harold balked, but a glance at Grant's resolute expression and the gun still in his hand convinced him to comply. With obvious reluctance, he scrawled out the statement Grant had requested, then thrust the notebook at Miller, who signed with a grimace. "Now what?" Harold asked sullenly after Grant had reviewed the document and tucked it away securely. "Now you leave," Grant said simply. "Both of you. Your horses should be fine in the lean-to with Sonny. Take them and go back to Golden Horizon." "In this storm," Miller protested, gesturing to the snow still swirling beyond the open door. "We'll freeze." "The storm's already easing," Grant observed, which was true. The wind had died down considerably in the past half hour. "And it's a fitting symmetry, don't you think, Zimmer? You left your wife to freeze, now you can see how it feels." Harold's face darkened with renewed anger, but he made no move toward Grant. Instead, he turned to Sophia, his expression a mixture of bitterness and resignation. "You think you've won, don't you? Found yourself a real man, someone better than me." He spat on the floor at her feet. "He'll tire of you too once he's had his fill. Men always do." Sophia flinched at the venom in his words, but held her ground. "Goodbye, Harold," she said quietly, refusing to engage with his attempts to wound her one last time. With a final venomous glare, Harold stalked out into the night, Miller trailing behind him. Grant followed them to the door, watching as they retrieved their horses from the lean-to and rode away into the swirling snow. Only when they were out of sight did Grant close and bar the door, his shoulders sagging with relief. "They won't get far tonight," he said, returning to the fire, "but they'll reach the mining camp by morning if they keep to the trail." Sophia remained standing where Harold had left her, trembling now that the immediate danger had passed. The confrontation had brought back every fear, every moment of intimidation she had experienced during her marriage. Yet she had stood her ground, had faced Harold's rage without cowering. That at least was a victory. "Are you all right?" Grant asked gently, setting his revolver aside and approaching her with careful steps. Sophia nodded, then shook her head, then found herself laughing through sudden tears. "I don't know," she admitted. "I'm terrified and relieved and angry all at once." Without a word, Grant opened his arms, offering comfort without demand. Sophia stepped into his embrace, burying her face against his chest as the emotional turmoil of the past days, past years found release in deep, racking sobs. Grant held her through the storm of emotion, one hand stroking her hair, the other secure around her waist, anchoring her when she felt she might fly apart from the force of her feelings. When her tears finally subsided, Sophia remained within the circle of his arms, drawing strength from his steady presence. "Thank you," she whispered against his shirt, now damp with her tears. "For everything." Grant's arms tightened around her. "You don't need to thank me, Sophia." He hesitated, then continued with careful honesty. "I care for you, more than I should, given the circumstances." Sophia lifted her face to his, finding his green eyes filled with an emotion that mirrored the one growing in her own heart. "I care for you too," she admitted. "It frightens me how quickly it's happened, but I can't deny what I feel." Grant's hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch gentle as he brushed away a lingering tear with his thumb. "We have time," he said softly. "Time to know each other properly without the shadow of Harold between us." "I don't want to rush you, Sophia. If something develops between us, I want it to be because it's truly what you desire, not because you feel indebted or in need of protection." His consideration, his willingness to wait despite the obvious attraction between them, confirmed what Sophia already knew. Grant Dawson was a man unlike any she had encountered before. A man worthy of the trust she was increasingly willing to place in him. "Thank you for that," she said, reaching up to touch his face in return, feeling the roughness of stubble beneath her fingers. "But know this: what I feel for you has nothing to do with gratitude or necessity. It's about who you are, Grant, who we might be together." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, warm, illuminating, full of promise. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to withdraw, Grant lowered his head until his lips met hers in a kiss so gentle it brought fresh tears to Sophia's eyes. This was no demanding possession, no assertion of ownership as Harold's kisses had become, but an offering, a question, a beginning. When they parted, Sophia felt as if something fundamental had shifted within her, as if pieces of herself long scattered by fear and self-doubt were finally coming back together in a new configuration. "We should rest," Grant said, his voice husky with emotion. "Tomorrow will bring its own challenges." They settled by the fire, close enough to draw comfort from each other's presence, but maintaining the respectful distance that both still felt necessary. As Sophia drifted toward sleep, her mind turned not to the confrontation with Harold, but to the future stretching before her, uncertain, yes, but bright with possibilities that had seemed unimaginable just days before. The journey to Denver resumed the next morning under clearing skies. With Harold's threat seemingly neutralized, Grant felt comfortable returning to their original route, which would take them through more populated areas where they could rest more safely. True to Grant's prediction, they reached a mining settlement by midday, where they were able to purchase a sturdy mare for Sophia to ride, relieving Sunny of her double burden. As they traveled, Sophia found herself opening further to Grant, sharing stories of her childhood that she had never told Harold, expressing hopes and fears she had kept buried for years. In turn, Grant revealed more of himself: his grief over his father's and brother's deaths in the war, his complex relationship with his mother who had never understood his desire to head west, his dreams for the future that now, increasingly, included her. By the time Denver's buildings appeared on the horizon 4 days later, Sophia knew with certainty that what she felt for Grant was no fleeting attraction born of gratitude or circumstance. It was deeper, more substantial, a foundation upon which something lasting could be built. They entered the city on a bright spring afternoon, the streets bustling with activity that seemed almost overwhelming after days spent in the wilderness. Grant led them to a modest but respectable boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Hollister, whom he knew from previous visits to the city. "Mrs. Hollister, this is Mrs. Sophia Zimmer," Grant introduced her. "She's come to Denver to establish herself as a seamstress. I was hoping you might have a room available for her." The older woman assessed Sophia with kind but shrewd eyes. "I do have a small room on the second floor," she confirmed. $15 a month, meals included. No gentlemen callers after 8 in the evening, no spirits on the premises." "That sounds perfect," Sophia said gratefully, relieved to find accommodation so quickly. As Mrs. Hollister showed Sophia to her room, a neat, sunlit space with a narrow bed, washstand, and small writing desk. Grant waited below, arranging for the care of both horses at a nearby livery. "Your husband isn't joining you?" Mrs. Hollister asked as she helped Sophia settle her few belongings. Sophia hesitated only briefly before answering with the truth. "I'm seeking a divorce, Mrs. Hollister. My husband was not kind." To her surprise, the landlady's expression softened with understanding rather than hardening with disapproval. "I see. Well, you won't be the first woman to start fresh in Denver, nor the last. Judge Carlton over on Lawrence Street is fair-minded when it comes to divorce proceedings, particularly in cases of cruelty. You might consider consulting him." Sophia thanked her for the information, touched by the unexpected support. When she rejoined Grant downstairs, she found him deep in conversation with a well-dressed man who appeared to be in his 50s. "Ah, here she is," Grant said, turning to Sophia with a smile. "Sophia, may I introduce Mr. Edward Thornton? He owns several businesses here in Denver, including a dress shop on Larimer Street. Mr. Thornton, this is Mrs. Sophia Zimmer, the skilled seamstress I was telling you about." Mr. Thornton bowed slightly. "Mrs. Zimmer. Grant speaks highly of your abilities. As it happens, I find myself in need of an additional seamstress at my establishment. Would you be interested in discussing the possibility?" Stunned by this stroke of good fortune, Sophia could only nod. "I would be very interested, sir, thank you." "Excellent. Perhaps you could come by the shop tomorrow morning. My wife oversees the day-to-day operations and would be pleased to evaluate your work." As Mr. Thornton took his leave, Sophia turned to Grant with wide eyes. "Did you arrange this?" Grant shook his head. "Merely a fortunate coincidence. I've done some surveying work for Mr. Thornton's railroad investments in the past. He happened to mention needing a seamstress, and I mentioned knowing someone with the necessary skills." His smile was warm with pride. "Your talent will do the rest." That evening, after a simple but satisfying dinner provided by Mrs. Hollister, Grant and Sophia sat in the boarding house's small parlor, the privacy of conversation afforded by the late hour and the absence of other guests. "I must return to my surveying duties the day after tomorrow," Grant said, his expression regretful. "The railroad doesn't take kindly to extended absences, even when they involve damsels in distress." Sophia smiled at his attempt at levity, though her heart constricted at the thought of his departure. "How long will you be gone?" "A month, perhaps longer," Grant replied. "The route takes me through difficult terrain, and we need to be thorough in our assessments." The prospect of such a separation, coming so soon after their arrival in Denver, filled Sophia with a sense of loss that surprised her with its intensity. In such a short time, Grant had become central to her sense of security and happiness. As if reading her thoughts, Grant reached for her hand, his fingers warm and reassuring around hers. "I'll write whenever possible," he promised, "and I'll return to Denver as soon as my work allows." "I know you will," Sophia said, squeezing his hand in return. "And I'll be here, building a new life. Perhaps by the time you return, I'll have made progress with the divorce proceedings." "I have something for you," Grant said, reaching into his pocket and withdrawing a small velvet pouch. "I acquired it today while you were settling in." Curious, Sophia accepted the pouch, loosening the drawstring to reveal a delicate silver chain bearing a small, intricately worked pendant in the shape of a compass rose. "It's beautiful," she breathed, lifting the necklace from its container. "I thought it fitting," Grant explained as he helped her fasten it around her neck. "You're finding your true direction now, navigating toward the life you deserve." The thoughtfulness of the gift moved Sophia deeply. It represented not just Grant's affection, but his understanding of her journey, the courage it had taken to leave Harold, the strength she would need to build an independent life. "I'll treasure it," she promised, her fingers tracing the contours of the pendant where it rested against her collarbone. "And think of you whenever I wear it." Grant's eyes darkened with emotion. "Sophia," he began, his voice lower than before, "I know it's too soon for declarations or promises. You're still legally bound to another man, and you need time to heal from what you've endured. But I want you to know that my feelings for you are sincere and growing stronger each day. as are mine for you," Sophia replied softly. "When I think of the future now, I see possibilities I never dared imagine with Harold, and in every vision of happiness I allow myself, you are there." The admission hung between them, both a commitment and a question. Grant's response was to bring her hand to his lips, pressing a fervent kiss to her palm that conveyed more than words ever could. "Then I will hold that hope close during our separation," he murmured, "and return to you as quickly as the railroad and these mountains will allow." The following day brought both triumph and poignancy for Sophia, her meeting with Mrs. Thornton at the dress shop proved successful beyond her expectations. The older woman, impressed by Sophia's neat stitches and eye for detail, offered her a position on the spot, with wages that would easily cover her board and allow her to save a modest amount each month. "You have real talent, Mrs. Zimmer," Mrs. Thornton observed as Sophia demonstrated her ability to adapt a pattern to different measurements. "With time, you might consider taking on custom work for our more discerning clients. The compensation for such pieces is considerably higher." By mid-afternoon, Sophia had secured not just employment, but a sense of purpose that had been lacking in her marriage to Harold. She hurried back to the boarding house, eager to share the news with Grant, only to find him preparing for his imminent departure. "The railroad sent word they need me to leave tonight rather than tomorrow," he explained, his expression apologetic as he packed his saddlebags. "There's been a landslide along the proposed route that requires immediate assessment." Disappointment washed over Sophia, tempered by her understanding of Grant's responsibilities. "Of course," she said, forcing brightness into her voice. "You must go where you're needed." Grant paused in his preparations, turning to face her fully. "I'd much rather be where I want to be," he said quietly, "which is here with you." The simple honesty of his statement eased the ache of their impending separation. "I got the position at the dress shop," Sophia told him, changing the subject to happier news. "I start tomorrow morning." "That's wonderful." Grant's genuine pleasure in her success warmed her heart. "I knew they would recognize your talents." As sunset approached, the moment of parting could no longer be delayed. Grant's horse was saddled, his supplies packed, his duties calling him back to the wilderness while Sophia remained in Denver to build her new life. Standing before the boarding house, they faced each other with hearts full of words unspoken but understood. Grant took both of Sophia's hands in his expression solemn yet tender. "This isn't goodbye," he said firmly. "It's merely until we meet again." Sophia nodded, fighting back tears that threatened to spill. "Until we meet again," she echoed, the promise bringing comfort even as her heart ached at his departure. Grant hesitated, glancing around at the public street with its occasional passers-by. Propriety dictated a restrained farewell, but the depth of his feelings demanded more. With a decision born of emotion rather than convention, he drew Sophia into his arms, his lips finding hers in a kiss that spoke of passion contained but not diminished, of devotion that would endure through their separation. When they parted, breathless and flushed, Sophia saw in Grant's eyes the same certainty that filled her own heart whatever obstacles lay ahead. They would face them together, building a future neither had dared dream of before fate and a blizzard had brought them together. "Be safe," she whispered as he mounted his horse. "Come back to me." Grant's smile held all the warmth of a summer sunrise. "Wild horses couldn't keep me away." With a final touch of his hat in salute, he turned his mount and rode away, leaving Sophia standing before her new home with a heart full of hope and a future bright with promise. The weeks that followed were a time of both challenge and growth for Sophia. Her position at Thornton's Dress Emporium proved demanding but rewarding, her skills improving under Mrs. Thornton's exacting guidance. The older woman proved to be not just an employer but a mentor, recognizing Sophia's potential and encouraging her artistic eye for design. "You have a natural talent for understanding how fabric should drape," Mrs. Thornton observed one afternoon as Sophia completed a particularly challenging evening gown for one of Denver's society matrons. "That's something that can't be taught." Such praise buoyed Sophia's confidence, which had been so diminished during her years with Harold. Gradually, she began to offer suggestions to clients about alterations that might better suit their figures or coloring, innovations that were invariably well received and enhanced her reputation within the shop. With Mrs. Hollister's guidance, Sophia also initiated the legal proceedings necessary to obtain her divorce. The landlady accompanied her to Judge Carlton's offices, lending moral support as Sophia presented Harold's signed confession along with her own account of his treatment. "These are serious allegations, Mrs. Zimmer," the judge said gravely after reviewing the documents. "Your husband's admission of locking you out during a blizzard constitutes attempted murder, legally speaking." "I don't wish to press criminal charges, Your Honor," Sophia clarified. "I simply want to be legally free of him." Judge Carlton studied her over his spectacles. "Given the circumstances and the unusual document your husband has signed, I believe we can expedite the proceedings. I'll issue a summons for Mr. Zimmer to appear or submit a formal response, but given his written statement, I anticipate being able to grant your divorce within 3 to 4 months." The prospect of such a relatively swift resolution filled Sophia with relief. In some cases, divorces could drag on for years, particularly if one party contested the proceedings. Harold's signed confession, coupled with Judge Carlton's understanding nature, promised a cleaner break than she had dared hope for. Throughout these developments, Grant's letters arrived regularly, sometimes lengthy missives, describing the beauty of the mountain landscapes he traversed. Sometimes hasty notes scrawled during brief respites from his surveying work. Each one Sophia treasured, reading and rereading them until the paper grew soft from handling. "The work is challenging but satisfying," he wrote in one such letter. "Yet I find my thoughts constantly returning to Denver, or rather, to you in Denver. The most magnificent vista cannot compare to the memory of your smile." Such sentiments, expressed with Grant's characteristic sincerity, sustained Sophia through the loneliness of building a new life alone in an unfamiliar city. She responded with equally heartfelt letters describing her progress at the dress shop, her growing friendship with Mrs. Hollister, and her hopes for their future. "I find myself sketching designs for a home," she admitted in one letter, "nothing grand but comfortable and welcoming. There is always a wide porch in these drawings where one might sit on summer evenings and watch the sunset over the mountains, and in my mind's eye you are always there beside me." May turned to June, and June to July. Denver bloomed in the summer heat, the city's parks lush with greenery, its streets bustling with commerce and new arrivals seeking their fortunes in the growing metropolis. Sophia flourished as well, her natural grace and intelligence winning her friends among the other seamstresses and the shop's regular clientele. One particularly warm afternoon in late July, as Sophia was completing work on a wedding trousseau for a banker's daughter, the bell above the shop door jingled to announce a new arrival. Without looking up from her precise stitches, Sophia called out the standard greeting, "Welcome to Thornton's." "Someone will be with you momentarily." "I'm hoping that someone might be you," replied a familiar deep voice that sent Sophia's heart racing. She raised her head to find Grant standing in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the bright sunlight streaming in from the street. He looked leaner than when he'd left, his skin darkened by exposure to the elements, but his smile was unchanged, warm, genuine, lighting his green eyes with affection. "Grant," Sophia exclaimed, setting aside her work and rising from her chair, mindful of propriety even as joy surged through her. "We weren't expecting you for another 2 weeks at least. We completed the survey ahead of schedule," Grant explained, removing his hat as he stepped fully into the shop. "And I found I couldn't stay away a day longer than necessary. Mrs. Thornton emerged from the back room, her expression softening as she observed the reunion. "Mrs. Zimmer, why don't you take the remainder of the afternoon off? The Peterson trousseau can wait until tomorrow." Gratitude flooded Sophia at her employer's understanding. "Thank you, Mrs. Thornton. I'll make up the time this weekend." "Nonsense," the older woman replied with a wave of her hand. "You've earned some leisure, just be back by 9 tomorrow morning." With her blessing, Sophia quickly gathered her belongings and joined Grant outside the shop. The July sun beat down on the boardwalk, but Sophia barely noticed the heat, her attention fully consumed by the man beside her. "You look well," Grant said, his gaze taking in the changes 2 months had wrought in her appearance. The haunted look that had shadowed her eyes when they first met had faded, replaced by a quiet confidence. Her cheeks held more color, her posture was straighter, and the compass rose pendant he had given her gleamed at her throat. "I feel well," Sophia replied honestly. "Better than I have in years, and you, the wilderness agrees with you, I think," Grant laughed, the sound warming her more effectively than the summer sun. "It has its charms, but I've missed civilization or certain aspects of it." His gaze held hers with unmistakable meaning. They walked through the city streets, catching up on the developments of their time apart. Grant spoke of challenging terrain, of disputes with the railroad executives about the feasibility of certain routes, of the beauty and danger of the high mountain passes. Sophia shared her progress at the dress shop, her growing confidence in her skills, and the promising developments with her divorce proceedings. "Judge Carlton believes it could be finalized by September," she concluded as they settled at an outdoor cafe table, grateful for the shade of a striped awning. "Harold hasn't contested any of it. In fact, according to the sheriff in Golden Horizon, he's moved on to a mining camp near Leadville." "Good," Grant said firmly. "The farther away, the better." As they sipped cool lemonade, their conversation turned from practical matters to more personal ones, the dreams they had shared in their letters, the possibilities that lay ahead for both of them individually and perhaps together. "I've been thinking," Grant said, a note of hesitation entering his voice. "The railroad has offered me a more permanent position overseeing the construction phase of the route I've been surveying. It would mean being based in Denver most of the time, with occasional trips to the construction sites." Sophia's heart leapt at the implication. "You'd be staying in Denver?" Grant nodded, his expression growing more serious. "I would, which brings me to something I've wanted to discuss with you." He reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "I know your divorce isn't final yet, and I would never presume to rush you into another relationship after what you've endured, but I want you to know that my feelings for you have only grown stronger during our separation." Sophia squeezed his hand, emotion tightening her throat. "As have mine for you," she managed. "I'm not proposing not yet," Grant clarified. "That would be premature and disrespectful of the healing process you're still navigating, but I am asking if you might consider a courtship between us, properly conducted once your divorce is finalized." The formality of his request, so different from Harold's impulsive proposal years ago, touched Sophia deeply. Here was a man who respected her enough to approach their relationship with thoughtful deliberation, who recognized the importance of her legal and emotional freedom before seeking deeper commitment. "I would like that very much," she replied, her voice steady despite the emotions swirling within her. "In fact, I can think of nothing I would want more." The smile that spread across Grant's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, illuminating, warming, full of promise for the day ahead. "Then we have an understanding," he said softly. "We do," Sophia confirmed, feeling as if her heart might overflow with happiness. The remainder of the afternoon passed in a golden haze of shared confidences and rekindled connection. By the time Grant escorted Sophia back to Mrs. Hollister's boarding house, where he had also taken a room for his stay in Denver, both felt secure in the path they had chosen, a path that would allow their relationship to develop naturally. Built on the solid foundation of mutual respect and genuine affection that had begun in a snow-bound cabin months before. The weeks that followed established a pattern that brought contentment to both Sophia and Grant. He took up his new position with the railroad, overseeing the construction crews that were beginning to lay track along the route he had surveyed. The work kept him in Denver 4 or 5 days each week, with short trips to the construction sites occupying the remainder of his time. Sophia continued to excel at Thornton's, her reputation growing to the point where certain clients specifically requested her work. Mrs. Thornton, recognizing her value, increased her wages accordingly, and began to involve her in the selection of fabrics and patterns for upcoming seasons. On evenings and weekends, Grant and Sophia explored Denver together, attending lectures at the newly established library, picnicking in the city parks, occasionally taking in performances at the opera house when their budgets allowed. Their courtship, conducted with propriety under Mrs. Hollister's approving eye, deepened their understanding of each other beyond the intense but compressed connection they had formed during their journey from Golden Horizon. September brought with it cooler temperatures, the first hints of autumn color in the trees lining Denver's streets, and the finalization of Sophia's divorce. The document arrived by courier one crisp morning, Judge Carlton's formal seal and signature making official what Sophia had known in her heart for months. She was free of Harold Zimmer, free to build a life of her own choosing. That evening, Grant took her to dinner at the Windsor Hotel, Denver's most prestigious establishment. As they sat in the elegant dining room, surrounded by the city's elite, Sophia marveled at how far she had come from the desperate woman pounding on a locked door during a blizzard. "To new beginnings," Grant proposed, raising his glass of wine in a toast. "To new beginnings," Sophia echoed, the crystal goblet catching the light from the chandeliers overhead. As they enjoyed their meal, Grant spoke of his latest project, a challenging section of track that required a trestle bridge over a particularly steep ravine. His eyes lit with enthusiasm as he described the engineering solutions his team had devised, his hands sketching the design in the air between them. "You love the work," Sophia observed, enjoying his animated expression. "I do," Grant acknowledged. "There's satisfaction in seeing something built that will connect places and people, that will endure long after we're gone." He paused, his expression growing more serious. "But I've been thinking about the future, about my original dream. The ranch." Sophia asked, remembering his description of the land he hoped to purchase east of Denver. Grant nodded. "The railroad position pays well better than the surveying work. At this rate, I could have enough for the land and initial construction by spring." "That's wonderful," Sophia said sincerely, knowing how important this dream was to him. "There's something else I've been meaning to discuss with you," Grant continued, a note of nervousness entering his voice that Sophia had rarely heard from him. "Something I've been waiting for the right moment to ask." Before he could continue, a waiter appeared with dessert delicate pastries drizzled with chocolate sauce. Grant fell silent, clearly preferring to wait until they were alone again before resuming the conversation. As they finished their meal and left the hotel, Grant suggested a walk through the nearby park, despite the evening chill. Sophia agreed, curious about what had brought that unusual tension to his voice. They strolled beneath trees turning gold and crimson in the fading light, their breath forming small clouds in the cooling air. When they reached a secluded bench overlooking a small pond, Grant guided Sophia to sit, then lowered himself beside her. "Sophia," he began, taking both her hands in his, "these past months have been the happiest of my life. Getting to know you, your strength, your kindness, your remarkable resilience has been a privilege I never expected when I found you in that blizzard." Sophia's heart began to race, sensing the direction of his words but hardly daring to believe it. "I know we agreed to a proper courtship, and perhaps this is still too soon," Grant continued. "If so, I'll understand. But today, when I heard your divorce was final, all I could think was that I didn't want to wait another day to ask you this question." Releasing her hands, Grant slipped from the bench to one knee before her, reaching into his pocket to withdraw a small velvet box. Opening it, he revealed a modest but beautiful ring, a single pearl nestled in a setting of delicate silver filigree. "Sophia Zimmer, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Of building a life with me, whether on a ranch or wherever our dreams might lead us?" Tears sprang to Sophia's eyes, not of sorrow or fear as so many of her tears had been in the past, but of joy so intense it overwhelmed her. This man, who had wrapped his coat around her on a snowy night and held her close when she needed protection most, was now offering her not just safety but partnership, not just shelter but a home built on love and mutual respect. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, Grant Dawson, I will marry you." Grant's face transformed with a smile of such pure happiness that Sophia felt it illuminate her very soul. With hands that trembled slightly, he slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to sit beside her once more, drawing her into an embrace that spoke of promise and protection in equal measure. "I love you," he murmured against her hair. "I think I've loved you since I found you on that porch, fighting for your life with a courage I could scarcely comprehend." "And I love you," Sophia replied, the words flowing easily now that they could finally be spoken. "For seeing me when I felt invisible, for valuing me when I had forgotten my own worth." Their lips met in a kiss that sealed their commitment, a pledge more binding than any legal document, more sacred than any formal ceremony could make it. When they finally parted, breathless and flushed despite the autumn chill, both felt as if they had crossed a threshold into a future bright with possibility. The wedding took place on a crisp November morning, just as the first light dusting of snow began to fall on the Denver streets, a gentle echo of the blizzard that had brought them together. The ceremony was small but joyful, held in the parlor of Mrs. Hollister's boarding house with the landlady, the Thorntons, and a few friends from the railroad and dress shop in attendance. Sophia wore a gown of her own creation, ivory silk, with delicate lace detailing that Mrs. Thornton had insisted on providing as a wedding gift. Grant, handsome in a new black suit purchased for the occasion, watched with undisguised adoration as his bride walked toward him on Mrs. Thornton's arm, her face radiant with happiness behind a short veil. The minister spoke of commitment built on respect and partnership, of the sacred trust between husband and wife, of the home they would create together founded on love rather than obligation. As Sophia and Grant exchanged vows and rings, those witnessing the ceremony could not help but be moved by the obvious devotion between them, a devotion forged in adversity and strengthened through choice. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared, his voice warm with approval. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." As Grant bent to kiss his bride, a collective sigh of satisfaction rose from their small audience. Here was a union that promised to endure, built on the solid foundation of genuine understanding and mutual respect. The celebration that followed was modest but heartfelt, with a luncheon provided by Mrs. Hollister and a small cake baked by one of the other boarders. Toasts were offered to the couple's happiness. Gifts were presented, practical items for their new home, along with a few luxuries, like a set of leather-bound books from Mr. Thornton. By late afternoon, the newlyweds departed for the small house Grant had rented on the outskirts of Denver, a temporary home, until their ranch could be established in the spring. As they rode in the hired carriage, Grant's arm securely around Sophia's shoulders, both felt a sense of rightness, of completion, that neither had experienced before. "Happy, Mrs. Dawson?" Grant asked softly, still savoring the sound of her new name. Sophia looked up at him, her eyes reflecting all the love in her heart. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible," she replied with perfect honesty. That night, as snowflakes continued to dance past the windows of their small house, Sophia and Grant discovered the final dimension of their bond, a physical expression of the love they had acknowledged with their vows. In Grant's gentle, reverent touch, Sophia found healing for the wounds of her past. In Sophia's trusting response, Grant found affirmation of the connection that had begun when he wrapped his coat around a desperate woman on a snowy night. Spring brought the realization of Grant's long-held dream as the couple purchased land east of Denver, rolling acres, with a creek running through the property and views of the distant mountains from the highest points. Together, they designed and began building their home, a sturdy structure with the wide porch Sophia had envisioned in her letters, where they could indeed sit on summer evenings and watch the sunset. Grant continued his work with the railroad, using his earnings to gradually stock their ranch with horses and cattle. Sophia established a small dressmaking business from their home, her reputation from Thornton's ensuring a steady clientele even at their somewhat remote location. As their first anniversary approached, Sophia had news to share that completed their happiness. She was expecting their first child, due in the early summer. Grant's response to the announcement was everything she could have hoped for: joy, tenderness, and a deepened commitment to the family they were creating together. Standing on their porch one evening, watching as Grant returned from checking their small herd of cattle, Sophia reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. From desperate fear to profound contentment, from a woman locked out in the snow to the mistress of her own home and heart, the transformation seemed almost miraculous. As Grant dismounted and approached the porch, his face lighting with pleasure at the sight of her, Sophia thanked whatever fate or providence had led him to find her on that snowy night. His arms encircled her waist, one hand resting protectively over the gentle swell of their growing child. "What are you thinking?" he asked, noticing her contemplative expression. Sophia smiled up at him, leaning into the embrace that had once saved her life and now sustained her spirit. "I was thinking that sometimes the darkest nights lead to the brightest dawns," she replied. "And that being locked out in the cold was worth it, to find such warmth in you." Grant's kiss was his answer, tender, passionate, and full of the promise that had begun when a cowboy wrapped his coat around a desperate woman and held her tight against the storm.